On April 16th, 1947, the town of Texas City, Texas woke up to what looked like a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning. The sun was rising over the Gulf Coast. Refinery whistles echoed across the harbor, and hundreds of workers walked toward the docks like they had done 1,000 mornings before. Dock workers carried lunch pails. Firefighters were finishing their morning coffee. Train crews guided freight cars along the terminal railway that ran straight to the waterfront. Nothing about that morning looked dangerous. But sitting quietly at Pier O was a cargo ship named SS Grandcamp, a rust-colored Liberty ship, 437 feet long, loaded with thousands of paper sacks stamped with a simple word: fertilizer. Inside the ship's hold were 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate, stacked floor to ceiling in 100-pound paper bags. To the men loading it, it looked like ordinary cargo, something meant for farms, something meant to grow crops. But hidden inside those harmless-looking bags was something far more dangerous, because this fertilizer had not originally been made for farms. It had been manufactured during World War II as part of military explosives, and now thousands of tons of it were sitting 300 feet from oil refineries, chemical plants, rail lines, and a busy industrial port filled with workers and families. No warning labels. No explosive markings. No special safety instructions. Just paper bags that said fertilizer. Here's the question nobody asked that morning. What happens when something designed for war is quietly placed inside a peaceful town, and nobody knows what it really is? Because at 8 a.m., inside one cargo hold of that ship, something began to smolder. A small wisp of smoke. Barely noticeable. But that tiny spark was about to turn an ordinary Tuesday morning into the largest non-nuclear explosion ever recorded on American soil. And in just over 70 minutes, an entire city would be changed forever. To understand what happened that morning, you have to understand what was really inside those bags. Because the material on the SS Grandcamp wasn't ordinary fertilizer. It was ammonium nitrate, a chemical that can help crops grow, but under the wrong conditions can also behave like a powerful explosive. During World War II, American factories produced enormous amounts of it for military use. It was used in demolition charges, battlefield explosives, and other wartime weapons. When the war ended in 1945, those factories didn't stop producing it. Instead, the government found a new purpose. The same chemical once used to destroy cities would now be sold to rebuild farms across Europe, where agriculture had been devastated by the war. It seemed like a perfect solution. Factories kept running, farmers received fertilizer, and the world moved forward. But there was one critical detail that almost nobody outside those factories knew. To make the chemical easier to spread on farms, manufacturers mixed it with a compound made of petroleum, resin, and paraffin. This additive kept the fertilizer from clumping together, but it also made the mixture far more unstable when exposed to heat. In simple terms, the material inside those bags behaved less like fertilizer and more like a sleeping bomb. Yet none of that appeared on the labels. Dock workers didn't know. Ship crews didn't know. Firefighters didn't know. Even the city itself had no chemical safety regulations governing how it was handled. So thousands of sacks were stacked inside the ship like ordinary cargo, warm from a long rail journey across the country, packed tightly inside a metal cargo hold, and left sitting for 2 full days in the Texas spring heat. Some workers even noticed something strange. The bags felt warm to the touch. Not hot, just warm. They mentioned it briefly, but nobody escalated it, because after all, it was only fertilizer. Or at least, that's what the label said. At around 8 a.m., longshoremen returned to the ship to continue loading the final sacks of cargo. They opened the hatch to hold number 4 and climbed down into the stacked rows of fertilizer bags. That's when someone noticed it. a thin ribbon of smoke rising from somewhere deep inside the cargo. At first, it didn't seem like a serious problem. Small fires sometimes happen in cargo holds. Usually they were easy to control. One worker poured water from a jug into the hold. Another aimed a fire extinguisher at the smoke. But the smoke didn't disappear. Instead, it slowly grew thicker. Within minutes, the workers realized this was something they couldn't control themselves. They climbed out of the hold and alerted the ship's officers. Now, imagine you're the ship's captain. You're standing on the deck, looking down at cargo worth thousands of dollars. If you flood the hold with seawater, you'll destroy the entire shipment. 2,000 tons of fertilizer ruined. Insurance claims, delays, diplomatic headaches. But if you control the fire another way, you might save the cargo. So the captain made a decision. Instead of flooding the hold with water, he ordered a hatch sealed and steam pumped into the compartment. It was a standard shipboard firefighting technique used to smother fires by removing oxygen. And for most types of cargo, it worked. But here's the critical question that nobody on that dock knew the answer to. What if the fire didn't need oxygen at all? Because ammonium nitrate carries its own oxygen inside its chemical structure. Seal it in a tight space. Heat it. Increase the pressure. And you don't smother the fire. You feed it without realizing it. The ship had just turned its cargo hold into something far more dangerous. A sealed chamber. A rising temperature. And 2,300 tons of explosive material slowly cooking inside it. The clock had started ticking. By 8:30 a.m., the situation on the dock had changed dramatically. The heat inside the cargo hold had been rising for nearly half an hour. Pressure built beneath the sealed hatch. Then suddenly, the hatch covers blew open, not with an explosion, but with a violent burst of pressure. And what followed was something nobody expected. A massive column of orange smoke erupted from the ship, bright gold and orange clouds rising into the morning sunlight. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked almost beautiful. Workers stopped what they were doing. Drivers pulled over. People from nearby factories walked toward the waterfront for a better look. Even a group of school children on a nearby pier moved closer. No one told them to leave, because nobody understood what that orange smoke meant. That color was a chemical signature of nitrogen dioxide, a gas produced when ammonium nitrate begins to decompose under extreme heat. In other words, the cargo inside the ship was approaching detonation temperature. But the people watching didn't see danger. They saw spectacle. Meanwhile, firefighters arrived on the scene. The Texas City Volunteer Fire Department rolled onto the pier with their trucks and equipment. 26 firefighters and their chief. Farmers, mechanics, store owners, men who had trained for years to protect their town. They connected hoses to hydrants and prepared to fight what they believed was a manageable ship fire. But here's the terrifying truth. Every single one of those men was standing within the blast radius of 2,300 tons of explosive material. None of them knew it. And just 600 feet away, another ship sat quietly in the harbor, the SS Flyer. It was carrying another 1,000 tons of ammonium nitrate. 2 ships, thousands of tons of explosive cargo, and a growing crowd gathered just a few hundred feet away, watching the smoke. At 9:12 a.m., the temperature inside hold number 4 reached a critical point, 338 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the temperature at which ammonium nitrate can shift from burning to detonating. What happened next didn't look like a normal explosion. The entire ship detonated. 6,000 tons of steel instantly transformed into shrapnel and blasted outward faster than the speed of sound. The shock wave tore across the harbor with unimaginable force. The fire trucks on the dock were vaporized. The firefighters standing beside them were gone in an instant. Buildings collapsed. Windows shattered 40 miles away in Houston. 2 small airplanes flying overhead were knocked from the sky. A barge was lifted from the water and thrown 110 feet inland, and the ship's 2-ton steel anchor was launched through the air like a missile. It traveled 1.6 miles before crashing into ground and leaving a crater 10 feet deep. The blast registered on seismographs in Denver, Colorado. Across the waterfront, the Monsanto chemical plant was obliterated. Oil tanks ruptured and ignited. Burning debris rained across the city like firebombs. Within seconds, the entire industrial district was on fire. But here's the most terrifying part. The explosion at 9:12 a.m. was not the end of the disaster, because only 600 feet away, another ship was now burning. When the SS Grandcamp detonated, the blast ignited the nearby SS High Flyer. This ship was loaded with 961 tons of ammonium nitrate and 1,800 tons of sulfur. Its engine was broken. It couldn't move, and now it was on fire. Rescue workers who had just survived the first explosion rushed back to the docks and tried to tow the burning ship away from a harbor. They attached cables. Tugboats pulled with everything they had, but the heat burned through the tow lines. The effort failed. The High Flyer drifted only 100 feet before the attempt collapsed. And then something even worse became clear. Texas City no longer had a fire department. Every fire truck had been destroyed in the first explosion. Every trained firefighter was dead. There were no hoses, no ladders, no equipment, nothing left to fight the fire. For the next 16 hours, the ship burned in full view of the devastated city. Everyone who had seen the first explosion knew what was coming. The only question was when. At 1:10 a.m. on April 17th, the High Flyer detonated. The second explosion ripped through a city already shattered. Walls that had survived the first blast collapsed. Rescue workers were thrown back from the rubble. More fires ignited across the harbor. When the disaster finally ended, the toll was staggering. 581 people dead, over 5,000 injured, nearly 1,000 buildings destroyed. But perhaps the most haunting symbol of the tragedy still sits in Texas City today. A massive steel anchor mounted in a memorial park. 2 tons of metal thrown more than a mile through the sky. A silent reminder that the line between fertilizer and explosive is sometimes nothing more than a label. And on that Tuesday morning in 1947, that label was missing.